NBA free agency week is here, and that means we're spending all week breaking down every single Suns option today. How can they find more scoring off of the bench? Trade targets, veteran flyers, younger flyers, and more on today's Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you for starting off free agency week here with Locked On Suns and making us your first listen every single day. You can follow at Locked On PHX Suns on Twitter, or you can do even better than that by just hitting subscribe or follow on the podcast platform that you're listening on right now. Make sure you don't miss us in your feed every single morning. And if you're finding us on YouTube, that's the best way to support the show. Go ahead and hit subscribe right down below. Make sure you're keeping up every day with free agency, and drop me a comment telling me which of the options that I'm about to walk you through is the one you like the best. Would love to hear from you guys. What do you think the Suns really need? What's realistic? And please don't drop any craziness to me that is not realistic, because look, the Suns do not have as much flexibility as we would like them to. They don't have as much flexibility as they did last year or the year before. They are now firmly not a cap space team. They are a team that now has to worry about the luxury tax. So we are not going to talk about DeAndre Ayton trades today, because I know there's a version where they get some of that scoring punch with a trade. I get that. I think that's obviously the best option to get a great difference-making player, is to get one back for DeAndre Ayton. But there's also some other pieces here. A lot of the trades we're going to talk about to start things off here are Jae Crowder, or their Torrey Craig, or their Cameron Payne, or their Landry Shamet. The Suns have tools. They might not be the best tools, but they can get some different players in the mix off of the bench to help out where Cameron Payne was not able to this past season, to help Chris Paul during the regular season not have to do so much, to play 35, 40 minutes some nights. We don't need to see that again. And here, hopefully, are some guys who can help alleviate that a little bit, make this team a little bit better. We'll start with those trades. Today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline, which has you covered all season long, with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, so we're starting with trades. We'll get into free agents next. And these are ranked, actually. I mean, it's a combination of how likely I think and realistic I think it actually is, and how much I would like it. So it's kind of like, is it possible and good is what the ranking is. And I start here with Alec Burks. He is the veteran combo guard, wing, scorer for the New York Knicks. He's a player that I feel like Suns fans have been thinking about to make this team better, to play next to Booker even before Chris Paul got here, for a long time now. He's bounced around a lot. He's a very valuable veteran player. I mean, I just think everybody would want him, and a lot of teams have wanted him, but at the same time, the Knicks are also in a situation now where they are trying to clear cap space. So I wonder if, I'll say the deal, and then I'll kind of give each side of it, okay? So I think Payne and a second. So Payne for Burks straight up works. I think the Suns would have to give a second, or maybe another young player. They don't really have a lot of those. Most likely a second-round pick, maybe multiple second-round picks, because I think Burks is just the better player. So as much as the Knicks might want to get rid of players to get cap space, I also don't think they're in the business of just losing trades. So, Payne plus a future second, that's not that big of a deal for the Suns. Payne is also only guaranteed for $2 million in 2023. So not only does he make less than Burks this upcoming season, so that would clear some space for them, he also is only on the books for $2 million the following year, and that basically gives them, another $4 million on top of that for the following season as they continue to juggle all of their contracts. So that would be the idea from their standpoint. And look, they want to bring in better players. They want to bring in a Malcolm Brogdon or a Kyrie Irving at guard, right? So they don't need Burks. He's sort of been their point guard, especially because Kemba Walker didn't work. So the main reason I think from the Suns standpoint, this is such a good one is he's good enough on defense to stay on the floor in the playoffs. He's been a genuinely good defender for a long time now. He's bigger and longer than most guards, which is why he can kind of guard, three positions probably. He makes his threes. He gets to the line enough. He can play make enough. And again, he can stay on the floor. He's a reliable guy at 30 years old who's not, over the hill, but he's also not somebody where you're going to have to give up an arm and a leg just to bring him in. I think he would be a really good fit here, and I think he could be available. Next up is Malik Beasley. So this one is, I think he would be a really good player. I think he is a really good player on offense for you, and we saw the difference that he made being able to play for Minnesota. And I don't know the details of where the criminal stuff is with him. I know that there were allegations. There was a trial, I believe. I don't know enough to speak to it. I do think that there's a limit to what the Suns will do from a character and culture standpoint. I don't know enough to say whether Beasley is somebody that is far enough beyond that to be, palatable. I don't know. What I will say is from the basketball standpoint, Crowder and Payne or Crowder and Craig work straight up. Crowder and Shamet for Beasley, and then maybe a young player from the Wolves works. Maybe the Suns give up a couple seconds in there as well, and they get Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt or Jaden McDaniels or Naz Reid. I think so. We know the Wolves are trying to balance out their roster, which is part of why this one kind of intrigued me. I don't necessarily know if Crowder is exactly the type of guy that they would want. They're trying to get a little bit bigger, but at the same time, that seems to mean that they want Karl Anthony Towns to play the 4 a little bit more, which would mean that Crowder would be a 3 for them. So I don't know if the fit works on their end, but I do think he would just be the best shooting two-way wing that they have. I mean, he's a better shooter than Beverly, better shooter than Jared Vanderbilt, better shooter than Jaden McDaniels, and he's probably a more sturdy defender than those young guys too. Not as athletic, their team would look a little different if Crowder had to play a lot, but I think he would just bring some stability, and he's an expiring contract, so it's not as if it's somebody that they're committing to long-term. I think from the Suns standpoint, Beasley would be an awesome addition during the regular season. He can do a little bit off the bounce. He shoots a ton of threes, makes a ton of threes, but I think he's a little bit undersized and has historically not been an awesome defender. So, you do have to worry if he's somebody who can stay on the floor in the playoffs. Next up, Tim Hardaway Jr. I actually mentioned Tim Hardaway Jr. in a pre-draft show talking a little bit about trades if the Suns were wanting to get into the first round using Jae Crowder, which John Gambadoro reported that they were looking to do, at least tentatively, and nothing came along that worked, obviously. But I think Hardaway and Crowder, that formation, that framing, still is something that the Suns might want to explore. I think something like Crowder, Payne, and 2 future seconds or something like that. I don't know really with the picks. The Suns don't have a lot. I don't think it would be worth doing a first for this, but here's where I come down on this one on kind of both sides. So I think that there's a version where if the Mavs lose Brunson, Payne might actually be somebody where he's pretty cost affordable. He's not making a whole ton of money. And he might be somebody where they feel like, next to Luka, where he can just attack the creases, play a little bit more with an actual lead ball handler rather than with the Suns where he was often on the court by himself. That might be attractive to them. I don't think he would be, this guy who can fully replace what Brunson was. Brunson's been a much better player than him lately, but an option. I think that could appeal to them. Plus, Crowder's a good player. I mean, he's a player that all championship teams need and everything else. I do just think on the Dallas side, they would be probably happy to get some more certainty there in terms of having a player instead of Hardaway Jr. who's coming off of injuries, where in Crowder and Payne, you probably feel like both of those guys can play. What I don't think is why I think this is less likely, and I think the Mavs probably don't love this idea, is talking about losing Brunson. Yes, Dinwiddie is going to be an option there. Payne will be an option there if that trade were to come together. But Hardaway would also be somebody who they would probably be needing to rely quite a bit on. So I don't know if getting rid of him at the same time that they're losing Brunson, suddenly you just don't have a lot of ball handling around Luka, and that's you still need that. You still need multiple options there. So they might not love that. Plus, I'm not sure they actually need a wing like Crowder all that much because they have Bullock Finney-Smith, and Kleba. Last one's just a little bit, I mean, it really belongs in the Flyers category too, but it is a trade, so I'll talk about it here, and that will set us up to get into some more of those Flyer types of guys. Malachi Flynn, you could do Torrey Craig straight up. Torrey Craig seems like a Raptors type of guy. You know, they're going to maybe lose Thaddeus Young and potentially some of their older bigs. Craig could be somebody they bring in and could just be a role player for them. Malachi Flynn wasn't in the rotation last year. He's still only 24. He's a solid pick and roll guy. He takes a good amount of threes, hasn't made a lot of them yet, but I just still think there's potential there. And if you're only giving up Craig, and you probably don't want to go into the offseason or into the regular season with Flynn as your only option as a backup point guard, that would probably scare all of us who want that position to improve for the Suns. But I don't think it would be the worst case scenario to bring him in replacement for somebody like Craig and just get, an option there, somebody who can turn into something for you. I just think that's the type of chance the Suns don't take often enough, and I would like to see them do more. On that note, veteran Flyers, guys who have been around the league a little bit but aren't going to be super expensive, that could fill a little bit of this scoring hole in the backcourt for the Suns. First, another quick word from BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered all year long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. They also have news, analysis, podcasts, articles, all of it to keep you informed during this year's Stanley Cup final, the baseball regular season, you're getting close to Wimbledon, and much, much more. Of course, you can bet on basketball still. It's not too late. Let's see what they have up here in the latest basketball odds. And WNBA, let's see that. You have today's odds for Sky Lynx. The Sky are 5.5-point favorites. That feels like a pretty safe bet. You have NBA regular season MVP for next year, where Devin Booker is plus 2,800, which feels pretty wild considering he got votes this most recent season. And then you see guys like Trae Young or Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, who are far from sure things next year. That feels pretty juicy. Plus 2,800. Imagine how nice that would feel. Book wins MVP and you get some money out of it too. That's what you can look for at BetOnline all year long. The fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports and events. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the latest trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Alrighty, so I want to remind us as we get into the free agency side of things, just one housekeeping thing, and I'll try to sprinkle these in as I'm talking about this stuff, just so you guys kind of know where I'm coming from. But so we've been talking a lot about the luxury tax, right, with DeAndre Ayton, and are the Suns afraid to go into it? Are they allowed? Is James Jones have the green light to spend that much? Who's calling the shots? Is Robert Sarver even the one making these decisions anymore? All of that. The Suns may go into the tax if they keep DeAndre Ayton. If they sign him to a max contract, they almost certainly would go into the tax this year. But they will go into free agency. So when the clock switches to July 1st, they will be operating as what the NBA kind of calls an over-the-cap team. And so that kind of changes the rules for what's allowed. If you're under the cap, there's certain stuff available to you. There's certain rules that govern what you're allowed to do. If you're over the cap, there's another set of rules. If you're over the tax, there's another set of rules. So they would be in that middle category of over the cap, but under the tax, because they won't have yet signed DeAndre Ayton. And teams have the entire regular season to get back under the tax. That's calculated at the end of the regular season, after the trade deadline, after you can cut players and stuff like that. So for right now, think of the Suns over the cap, but under the tax. So that means they have the full $10.35 million mid-level exception available to them. It's the same one that they used to sign Jae Crowder in 2020, the same one that they used a part of to sign JaVale McGee in 2021. And so that kind of sets the table for who they could be looking at. They can't go out and get, I guess just to throw out a crazy example, like they're not able to go give Zach LaVine an offer for $35 million. They don't have cap space, but they do have this exception and a couple of other exceptions that they could use. So let's start here. I'm ranking these ones again in terms of how much I like them. I think they're all these players are going to be available. So the reality part of it doesn't really matter as much as it did with the trades. The Suns can get all these players because they're all free agents. So starting with Gary Harris, I think he's probably going to get a part of the mid-level exception. He's only 27. He has proven two-way performance, so I think there might be a little bit of a market there, but I don't think it quite reaches all the way to him getting the full mid-level just because he did fall off so dramatically with the injury, then getting traded to Orlando as part of the Aaron Gordon deal and not really playing on a difference-making team. I think he's under the radar a little bit, so I just don't see there being this bidding war for him, but I think he's more than a minimum player. I was just poking around at his numbers a little bit, read some stuff in terms of previewing his market. I think he's more of an off-ball scorer than a real creator. I mean, that's always been the case for him, but I think he's still, last year with Orlando, he played pretty well. He was a solid shooter. He's still a pretty good cutter based on those days with Nikola Jokic. I think you could feel like he would fit pretty good with what the Suns want to do on offense, and he's a pretty solid finisher. Like, he's undersized in terms of, like, he plays like a wing, but he's more of a guard size. He's not 6'6", 6'7". He's like 6'4", but he can still finish and he can still guard bigger players. He might not be the absolute best version of, he's not Jaylen Brown, but he's, for his size, I think he does a pretty good job. I think he's been a solid defender his whole career. You probably could trust him to stay on the floor in the playoffs. And, you know, he's not that juice of, I'm going to go get you a bucket. He's not Eric Gordon, like somebody like that. But I think he could have a similar second act in his career to somebody like Avery Bradley, who's always seems to have a market every season, always seems to be well-liked, perform on both ends, and just be a trusty player. And he's only 27. He's still in his prime. It seems like the injury is behind him. So I think Gary Harris would be a really, really strong addition. And he's a little bit more of a scorer than most of your typical just like 3-and-D guys. Like, I don't have Wes Matthews on this list, but Wes Matthews would be just the 3-and-D part. He's not going to score for you, and he's in his late 30s, whereas Harris is almost 10 years younger than that and gives you a little bit more. Dennis Schroder up next. I think he could even end up on a minimum contract, as crazy as that might sound, or maybe the biannual exception, which is something the Suns have chosen not to use most years, but theoretically it's available to them. They still could. I think Schroder, the past 2 years where he was underwhelming in LA and then just bounced around last year and ended the season on a tanking team in Houston, I think that it's masked that he's still a pretty decent player. I also think he was just a bad fit in Boston. I think he wasn't really happy to end up there. I think if you brought him in, we obviously know his best season of his career came next to Chris Paul. So we also know he can work with other ball handlers. Even though his past few seasons haven't been great, I think he has shown he can coexist with Chris Paul, with LeBron James, with Jason Tatum. And I think he's still a pretty good shooter and table setter, even if maybe his overall game has been in a little bit of a lull the past 2 seasons. I think he's neutral at best as a defender, but I don't think he would get played off the floor. Maybe in like the game 7 of a conference finals type of a situation, he isn't somebody you fully trust, but I think in most situations, I think he can at least play. He's going to get hunted, but I mean, at this point, what guy isn't going to? Cameron Payne got hunted. Chris Paul got hunted, for heaven's sake. You can't always have bulletproof rotation players every single 1 through 10. Last but not least, Jeremy Lamb. I think Lamb's a minimum player. I think he is a pretty big risk. I think he is at the, a vast bottom of this list, but he is an unrestricted free agent. He still shot 36% from deep as a Pacer, even as he's been very slowly coming back from injury. He hasn't played more than 50 games since 2018-19. So like I'm saying, this is a big, big flyer. I mean, the hope is, can you get a baseline of a 3-and-D player? Because he has pretty solid size and length. If he gets healthy, you could imagine him at least just being able to stay on the floor as a defensive player. And if he can just make his threes, which he did even while he was hurt, that's a rotation player in the NBA. And if you're getting that at a minimum, that's a pretty big win for a team in the Suns who's dealing with back stuff. I just think the health is a big part of it. And then can he be a guy who gets a little bit more of that shot creation as he continues to get healthier. Because obviously you think back to UConn or some of those early Indiana days and everything else where it's like, yeah, he was a pretty big, or Charlotte, I think, was where he started his career. Like, he could get a bucket for you. It wasn't maybe the most efficient thing in the world, but he could do that. If he can't rediscover that, or if you don't feel comfortable that he can, it's probably just, you probably have better options. Like, if you're just going pure 3 and D, you can probably get a guy on the minimum who's still just a more of a sure thing. But if you feel like Lamb, hey, maybe he can get some of that scoring juice back, then maybe he is worth it on a minimum, and you get something where he's a pretty big difference maker compared to what he's making. I don't know. It's a big flyer. It would be a pretty big risk. Maybe there's a better use of a roster spot, but I think he ends up somewhere. And I don't think it would be a terrible thing if the Suns don't love any of their other options to just try and see what he can do. It's similar to what the Warriors did with Otto Porter last year. I think Otto Porter has a much higher ceiling. He's bigger. It made a little bit more sense, but I think you could get something similar with Lamb. All right, let's go to younger Flyers. Who are three? I have 2 guys plus a 2 honorable mentions who the Suns could get in free agency, who would be on the younger end, a little bit less risky because you feel like they can continue to get better, and be, again, some scoring 2-way players for you. First, today's show brought to you by Rock Auto, with so many makes and models and trim packages and this and that. And, oh, this was the year that the redesign happened, and this one's hybrid and this one's not. It's pretty difficult. It's maybe borderline impossible to know that you're getting the right thing at a chain auto parts store or a dealership, and to pay what you should have to pay for it. So switch to rockauto.com and save time and money. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers online for over 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every customer. They have an easy-to-use website. All you have to do is type in the car that you have, scroll down to the part that you need, hit purchase, and it's at your door within days. No added costs and fees, no dragging on as the dealership tries to search for the place to buy it from to then resell it to you, or any of that nonsense that we've all dealt with, that we all hate to deal with. It's simple. At rockauto.com, you save 30, 50, even 100% versus the chain store or car dealership. So go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, we are closing out with 2 young Flyers and 2 honorable mentions here. The honorable mentions aren't because I don't like them as players, but we'll get to that. Again, we just have to keep in mind the Suns don't have cap space. So Malik Monk is where we will start. He's developed into a really good three-point shooter. He's been at basically 40% for 2 straight seasons now on a lot of attempts. He's a pretty solid ball mover. He doesn't just suck the oxygen out of the offense. He really, truly has shown, I think, playing with LaMelo Ball and those Hornets teams, and now with LeBron James and Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook, that he can coexist on an offense. He can keep the ball moving. He can be part of a system. And even though the three-point shooting has gotten the most attention, he still makes his twos. He still attacks the basket enough to keep the defense honest. He's not a one-dimensional player on offense. Defensively, he's a negative. I mean, there's no way around that. He's been negative his whole career from the advanced metrics. You just watch him play, and, there were people who watched the Lakers closely who I feel like said last season that he at least put the effort in. He was part of lineups that could defend at a decent level. The Lakers at times were an okay defensive team. But most of the season, they were an offense-first squad. They didn't have a lot to play for by the end, and he didn't have to play in the playoffs. Still, he's never really proven himself in the playoffs. So I just think, again, not just the statistics and everything else, but he's small. There's no way around that. So he just might be a player who doesn't have a great role come playoff time. I think he's probably getting the full mid-level exception, that $10 million. Players who can create for themselves, shoot at a high level, and are young tend to just get paid a lot of money. And so it might even be higher than that mid-level. He might go to a team with cap space. I don't know. That sounds probably less likely, but I think anything less than the mid-level he would be pretty disappointed with, which would mean the Suns would have to fork over all of that to get a player that is a question mark. Second guy here, Caleb Martin, could be a restricted free agent, so keep that in mind. But I also think Miami, they do so much every offseason that you could easily imagine that they just renounce his rights. They don't have the qualifying offer out, and he just becomes an unrestricted free agent. I think he's a guy who is probably around that biannual exception number. He could even be a minimum guy. He was somebody who started last year on a two-way deal and then got elevated to a full contract and time to be on the playoff roster, similar to what the Suns did with Ish Wainwright. So it's not like he's been this proven commodity, but he did play really, really well with Miami last year. So maybe you could get him on a minimum if you're giving him a guaranteed contract, but maybe you give him a player option in the second season on another minimum deal where it's like, if you play poorly this year and you just don't look like an NBA player, you at least have that option where you can make a minimum salary again the following season rather than falling out of the NBA. That could be a way to do this. Maybe he gets all the way up to the biannual. I'm not sure. But again, last year in Miami, he was pretty much everything you would want from a 3-and-D guy. He shot an incredible percentage from deep. He backed that up with shooting a good percentage from the free throw line, which is what you want to see normally. I think in college and early in his NBA career, he was more of a point guard where he would ball handle. He would, try to get to the basket, run some pick and roll. I think he's very much at his best right now. He's a complementary player. I mean, you know how Miami plays. They're going to spread the floor. They're going to share the ball. They're going to very much not rely on any one person too much, and that seemed to get the most out of him. I think the Suns do that, so it could be a similar thing, but you probably don't see him as a bucket getter like I've been saying with a couple of these guys. He's not somebody where you plug in as your sixth man and you just trust he's going to get 15 a game. Like that's not what he is. But I also think he's just 26. He could continue to get better. He's never really had a role on a team consistently. I think he's earned one. And if he can keep shooting and he has the good size and everything else to play defense, like a basement of a good 3-and-D player who can continue to get better, like, I don't know. I think some team could really, really get lucky with Caleb Martin if they just decide to take a chance on him, spend a little bit more than the minimum and just go get him. Just try it. I think that he really appeals to me. All right, 2 honorable mentions here. Lonnie Walker, the fourth, doesn't seem like he's fully in the Spurs' plans. Maybe he could be somebody, even though he is a restricted free agent, the Suns don't have the cap space to go sign him. Maybe he could be somebody you get with the mid-level exception. Use the mid-level exception to sign him to an offer sheet if there aren't a lot of suitors out there for him. And I think he can be that. It would be difficult to trust him right now to say he's our playoff scorer, but I don't think it's crazy to think he could develop into that. If you're bringing him in along with a couple of other options and just hoping one of them hits, I think you could do a lot worse. He has good size. He has good off the bounce ability. He can get to the basket. He's gotten better every year in San Antonio. And then Romeo Langford, who's actually also a Spur. He came over in the Derek White trade, originally drafted by Boston. He was the 13th pick, I think, or 14th pick back in the 2019 draft. I still believe in him. He's always been a good defender. He played decently well for Boston before they traded him. And I just think there's untapped potential there. I think he's still pretty young. Again, he could be pretty affordable, even if it did require an offer sheet and all the nonsense that comes along with waiting until the other team has decided whether to match. And like those things aren't fun to deal with, which is why I put these guys at honorable mentions. But I think Langford, he's big, but he can also handle the ball. And he's at least enough of a shooter where you feel like he could maybe get better there. Think of him like, similar to what Jeremy Grant was when he got to Oklahoma City, right? Or when he got to Philadelphia during the process, where it's like good size, good skill, but like it's just raw sort of. Can you put it together? And I think if you give him an opportunity like Boston did at the beginning of this year, he could become something. And I don't think that he's going to be so expensive that you're going to get priced out and some team swoops over and gives him $20 million. I think if you're targeting him in free agency, you could get a pretty solid player if things break right for you. So we'll keep going. I'm going to have backup center options or other sort of center options in the event that the Suns, I guess big man options is a better way to put it, in the event that the Suns do part ways with DeAndre Ayton. I'll obviously cover any more rumors and reports that come along linking them to any of these players. We'll talk about other trades. We'll talk about Chris Paul options, all of it. We are fully in free agency mode, so keep it right here. Hit subscribe, hit follow wherever you are listening or watching. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Now, go make Locked On NBA your second listen to keep up with everything around the whole league as we head toward free agency.